Hey there everyone, Steve the Amateur Historian at your service. It's May 22nd, 2021. A new day, a new story. But before we get to that, remember as always to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out there. The more patrons I get, the more help I get that way, the more I can continue producing content, the likes of this and various other things. And I'm always posting new stuff there as a thank you for supporting my channel. And the link to that is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages closely related to the content I'm producing here on this channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. And without further ado, let's get to today's story. So I've already told a few stories on this channel about cases related to Prohibition, and how everyone tried to cheat around it. It's very interesting reading these stories. It reminds me a lot about, like, granted, weed's not legal in all states. It should be, but isn't. But it kind of reminds me of, like, when weed was pretty much illegal almost everywhere, but people still went to whatever lengths necessary to get it. Is kind of our more contemporary representation of what, like, Prohibition was like back then, because if people wanted beer, they were going to go to whatever lengths they had to get it, even in the face of being busted for it. People wanted their booze, and most people who wanted to get it managed to get to it. Prohibition was not really all that successful, and I've still found story after story from the period that Prohibition existed, from 1920 to 1933, of violence perpetrated by people who were drunk. And that was one of the, I mean, there was obviously multiple factors, but one of the main driving forces behind Prohibition was a lot of women, a lot of temperance women, especially a lot of women whose husbands were getting drunk all the time and raging on them and their family. And, you know, a lot of wives, you know, got sick of that. They wanted to take away this vice. But, you know, I still read so many stories about husbands who would get drunk during the 1920s and rage on their families. Prohibition did not stop that. And it's just, it's very entertaining seeing the desperation. And so we have Prohibition fully go into effect all across America in January of 1920. And here we are, it's May 1920. It's only been a couple of months. And, you know, I told you the story about the guy that was busted with a bunch of beer. Actually, wait, no, that story hasn't happened yet. I shoot these videos so out of sync. But anyway, there's Prohibition-related stories about people getting busted with booze and having to come up with whatever excuses they can to justify why they have that booze. And I actually found 2 articles that were published in papers on this day back in 1920 that they're not related to each other, but they both kind of show people really pushing the need for beer. And again, I mentioned earlier that kind of how weed kind of has kind of a similar stigma, you know, when it wasn't legal anywhere in America, but people were still getting it however they wanted, and there was a lot of commonalities between Prohibition and then just weed being illegal pretty much everywhere. But one of the ways you could get weed when it wasn't really legal anywhere was through medicinal needs. If you had an ailment that weed could help, you could go to your doctor and maybe, hopefully, they would prescribe marijuana for you to use for medicinal purposes. So that was one way to get weed. Well, I found an article from this day back in 1920 that kind of was the exact same thing, except it was for beer. And this wasn't just some wild, you know, some doctor who was also a drunk desperately trying to present some justifiable medical need for beer just so that, you know, he could justify having a drink. He could justify sneaking other people drinks. And, you know, if you got some doctors out there that are pro drinking beer, they could prescribe beer for anyone's ailments and then just give, you know, random people justification to have booze on them. Give them a note or a letter. If the police bust you with booze, you can just be like, doctor said it's okay, and then you got a way around it. No, it wasn't that. The Secretary of the Treasury, a guy by the name of Mellon, they only refer to him as Secretary of Treasury Mellon, so I don't know what his first name is, because despite being an amateur historian, I don't have all the names of every, you know, Secretary of Treasury memorized. But anyway, Secretary of Treasury Mellon, as was his name, he was pushing aggressively, and that's what's discussed in this article. He was pushing aggressively for you know, Prohibition's brand new. They were still kind of working out the kinks of it, and he was pushing heavily towards passing, you know, some legislation in connection with Prohibition that would allow people who were sick or people who had ailments, diseases, what have you, to have alcohol, be legally able to prescribe alcohol to help with ailments. I guess weed gets you high and relaxes your body. You're drinking enough beer, I guess you'll forget how much misery you're in. But yeah, it was so interesting that even someone that high up, just a couple months after Prohibition goes into effect, and he's already saying, but wait, I do think beer should be made available for medical treatments, just like medicinal marijuana in more recent years. Except I feel, you know, the positive attributes of using marijuana for your ailments are obviously substantially more reliable than drinking alcohol to, I guess, suppress your ailments. But it was 1920. I mean, a lot of these people probably didn't know how bad alcohol really is for you, especially when taken in abundance regularly. You know, it's just like cigarettes. They didn't really know way back then how bad they were. Everyone smoked. You know, a lot of people thought it actually made them healthier. So that was a, you know, national story coming out of Washington, that the Secretary of Treasury was behind this. On the same day, there was a story posted out of Chicago, Illinois, about a guy named John Spies, I'm guessing is how you pronounce his name. His last name, it's spelled S-P-I-E-S-S. Spies or Spies. I'm going with Spies. John Spies just rolls off the tongue a little better for me. So this guy was a saloon keeper, so he was probably having a rough go, since literally just months earlier they told him as a saloon keeper you can't dole out alcohol anymore. And in the beginning of Prohibition, federal agents converged on his saloon and took, they said 1,057, I think, like quarts. Was it quarts? It was a lot of booze from him. So by May, ooh, want to hear a story? Ooh, that mutt want to hear a story. I know dogs love beer. No beer, it's not healthy. So Spies goes before a court saying he wants his booze back. And the reason he wants his booze back, I don't know how he thought this would help it out. Maybe he was trying to go that kind of medicinal way. I use it for medical ailments. But he went before a judge to try to get his booze back. And the reason he was trying to get his booze back was, simply put, as he was quoted in the article, it was for his own personal use. I don't know if he elaborated beyond that, because it's like, it's Prohibition. You can't drink alcohol, so who cares whether it's yours? It would still be taken away from you. That's what Prohibition was all about. It's preventing people from being able to drink alcohol. So who cares whether it's for your own private use at that time? The judge then looks at him, asks him, Mr. Spies, how old are you? And Spies replies that he's 53 years old. And the judge says, well, essentially, unless you're planning on living another 100 years and living to be 153 years old, you're never going to drink all this beer. I get the feeling that the judge was probably playing around with him, because obviously the judge knows, like, you can't just give this guy alcohol back. Oh, almost tripped up. You can't just give this guy his alcohol back just because it was his, because it's prohibition. So I think the judge was just playing around with this guy. He said, you'd have to live to be 153 before you drank all this booze. So I guess that would be like 10 quarts a year, a little over 10 quarts, 10.57 quarts a year, something like that. Which, trust me, alcoholics could take down on that. They could take down that much in less than a month. But again, I think the judge was just messing with him. So he was like, so unless you're planning on living to be 153, you don't need all this alcohol back. And then the judge goes on to say something, words to the effect of, you know, unless you plan on dying in your youth, which the guy was 53, he was hardly a youth anymore, but I think he was meaning, like, unless you're planning on dying soon, you don't need all this booze. But then again, you know, here's a guy who runs a saloon who's probably, his business isn't going well, he's having to transition into something else, or he's having to sneak booze to people. Maybe that was part of his overall plan, was he wanted all this booze back so he could, like, sell it, you know, under wraps from law enforcement, and that would be a way he could make money, because obviously he probably wasn't making a whole lot of money running that saloon in those days. Then again, maybe, you know, his once profitable business, if it even was profitable, maybe it was starting to go under. Maybe he did really just want to drink himself to death. It was extremely common at that time for, you know, especially, you know, if you were a man, you know, if you were a man, you were expected to be a man. You stood tall, you ran a successful business, you worked your tail off, you were a good representation of your town, your neighborhood. And, you know, a lot of guys, you know, same thing today, a lot of men can't handle shame or failure, and they'll just fade into obscurity, just drinking themselves away. Maybe that was part of the reason he wanted the booze back. I have a feeling he maybe had other more nefarious means that he was planning on going by, but it's just bizarre that this guy's like, I want all that booze back. Why? Oh, because it's mine. And I wasn't gonna give it to people, I was gonna drink it myself. That argument doesn't hold water either. So I just thought it was very entertaining that, you know, it just shows the desperation, especially people that loved their drink. The desperation that people were descending into. Here we are, we're like barely 5 months into Prohibition, and you've got appointed presidential cabinet members saying, well, let's still offer beer in this instance. And you just had people all over the place. You know, if they got busted with beer, they were trying to find all sorts of reasons to justify it. So it was just a lot of chaos, a lot of paranoia, and a lot of frustration, and just a lot of pissed off people that used to be able to just drink to their heart's content whenever they felt like it, and to hell with the repercussions of what them getting drunk would have in store for other people in the world around them. Just Prohibition, man. Drove people nuts. So that's a twofer. I gave you 2 stories today from the same day in relation to the same thing. Prohibition sucks. So I hope you enjoyed that story about alcohol consumption, and the need a lot of people feel to always have alcohol available to them. If you like what I'm doing, if you like my channel, whether you've been here a while or you're a newbie, help my channel grow. Remember to like my video, share, subscribe to the channel, hit up my Patreon. I'm always posting new stuff there for you, again, to benefit you in exchange for helping me out, allow me to do more of what I like to do. The link to my Patreon is in the description of this video, as well as the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages closely related to the content I'm producing on this channel. Steve the Amateur Historian. Whew! And all that said, you took that corner a little tight, Grandpa. Anyway, till next time, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian, and I'll see you tomorrow.